Hello, my brother. Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. What might happen if you were to look at this entire coronavirus situation, this era that you and me and we are all living in right now, as one big initiation process? An initiation into a heightened form of humanity, of consciousness, of elevation. A call to you to step into a bigger version of yourself, the greatest version of yourself, the great man within. So what does it mean to be in an initiation? Why would you want to look at it this way? What are the phases of initiation? What are the benefits of initiation? These are all great questions that are going to serve as the basis for our conversation today. Now, first and foremost, the other day, I mentioned that I'm seeing an emergence of two camps of men. The first camp of men do not have a foundation of inner work to stand upon. And this group of men are suffering inordinately through this coronavirus era. They're desperately seeking for an end to this, wanting it to be over. There's a white knuckling of this experience. There's a lot of pain and angst suffered by this group of men because they don't have the tools, the skill sets, or the training to stand upon to navigate a situation like this. And there's no judgment towards those men, but it's the reality of that group that I see. This other group of men who have done some inner work, who are standing on a foundation that is sturdy, recognize that even though we are in a painful, destructive, inconvenient period of time, that there is a significance to this moment, that there is a deeper calling for us to rise, to become better men. And the men who are looking at it from this perspective can recognize that we are no longer in an ordinary world. We have transcended a threshold from ordinary to non-ordinary. And that is where we go on what's called a hero's journey. Now, if you've ever heard of Joseph Campbell, he wrote the book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he was the one who popularized, or I don't want to say popularized, he invented the term the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell was a profound student of mythology and stories that we as humans seem to love. And across all cultures and time frames and languages and dialects, he found that we all seem to gravitate towards a certain form of story, which is called the hero's journey. That shows up in almost every major successful Hollywood movie that you've ever heard of, like The Matrix or Forrest Gump or Star Wars. And really, it's the same formula over and over again. It's basically, and there's a number of components, but I'm just going to simplify it. There's an ordinary world. The world changes. Our hero resists the change. He is then confronted by a mentor who pushes him past his resistance, goes into a non-ordinary world, the belly of the beast, where a part of him dies. The old world version of him dies, and he enters this extraordinary space where he then reconstitutes himself as a better version of himself and then comes back into the ordinary world and shares what he has learned. All right, so it's basically ordinary world, non-ordinary world, back to the ordinary world as a different version of himself. That's the hero's journey. Now, Robert Moore, who is the author of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, who is a Jungian psychoanalyst and a deeply influential leader in men's movement, he consulted with the Mankind Project. He wrote a number of books around men's work. And one of the books that he wrote is called The Archetype of Initiation, which is about sacred space, ritual process, and personal transformation. And Moore says that initiation is the process of dying and being reborn. It's the cycle of life, dying and being reborn. And one of the problems that he writes about in King, Warrior, Magician, Lover is that in our modern society, most men have never gone through a rite of passage or an initiation ritual that allows our boyish ways, the boy inside of us, to die so that we can be reborn as men. That's why we see a bunch of grown men running around with really little boys as their personalities. We see this all of the time. I remember listening to Nelson Mandela's book, A Long Walk to Freedom, where he talked about in his early teenage years, or maybe it was even younger than that, there was a ritual process of turning boys into men where the boys would be taken, stripped from their mothers, and mothers willingly participated in this process, where the boys would then go live with ritual elders down in huts near like a lake or a river for a period of days or even weeks. And there was a ordeal that these boys had to go through where they would be circumcised, where their skin would be chopped off, and they would bury that skin, which was ceremonially the boy that had died. And they would bury that, and in that point in time, they became men. I don't know if this was also what Nelson Mandela's tribe did, but I believe there was like a knocking out of one of their front teeth. I know that's part of some ritual process, but there's always an ordeal. There's always some form of suffering because you need that to transcend the ordinary world. In our ordinary worlds, we are prone to drift, right? That experience of thinking we're making conscious decisions when in actuality we're just being dragged around by our habits and patterns and unconscious fears and belief systems and pressures that your family put on you or what your mom and told you to do or your dad told you to do, what society expects of you, what your business expects of you. And oftentimes you're not even behind the driver's seat, right? Like you're in the trunk of the car while all of those things are autopiloting your life. And it's only when typically an outside force thrusts itself upon you do you wake up and start to ask deeper questions about your life. Well, this is one of the biggest wake-up calls from drift that we have ever experienced, and some people are still fighting it. But those of you who's listening to this right now, knows that there's something significant happening here. We are no longer in the ordinary world. We have transcended that ordinary space. We are in what Robert Moore would call sacred space right now, where nothing is the same. So he talks about the 3 phases of initiation in his book, The Archetype of Initiation. I want to read you a few passages. So the 3 phases are, number 1, the challenge, number 2, the transcendence, and number 3, the reconstitution. The challenge, the transcendence, and the reconstitution. So here's what he says. The first phase refers to the sum total of a person's present state of consciousness, the experience of what philosophers would call the life world, the way the world makes coherent sense to you at your particular place in life. You may not like what sense your world makes, but it does make some coherent sense. It hangs together in some way. You sort of know who you are and where you've been and where you are going. You might even say, in Erickson's terms, that you have a psychological identity of some form. Human beings throughout the centuries, however, have noticed painfully that these attainments to a location in time periodically come to an end. And there are basically 2 kinds of reasons for this. One is related to the natural life cycle and fairly predictable. And what he's talking about here is basically life and death. We're going to grow old and we're all going to die. And the other is related to specific events in a particular person's life and somewhat less predictable. So these specific events that we are existing in right now are the coronavirus. And this is not predictable. We couldn't have predicted that this happened at this particular point in time and that it would go down in this way, right? And so now we are forced to contend with this shift in the ordinary world. So the middle phase of initiation, which is the transcendence, the middle phase of initiation is nowhere, limbo, dissolution, hell, sacred space. Everyone has experienced that phase many times, and we need to talk about it frankly. This is the tomb, the belly of the whale, the womb of the tomb, and the tomb of the womb. In order to be human and keep moving toward a fulfilling life, you need from time to time a destruction of your former consciousness and life world, and this requires incubation. Now, what he's talking about here is that in order for us to grow, there has to be parts of us that die, that we leave behind, right? Like there is a part of me that used to be compulsive, that used to be fearful, that used to be armored emotionally. That part of me had to die so that I could transcend that level of ordinary world to a place where I could be confident, where I can control my emotions, where I could feel my emotions, allow my emotions, to know that I was safe to express my emotions so that I could move into a higher form of being as a man, who could be a leader that could be trusted, who could hold the space for others. Right? But to go through that process, I absolutely had to go into that initiation, that middle phase of nowhere, limbo, dissolution, hell. There were plenty of times where I just flopped on my couch and felt demotivated because there was an old part of me that was dying. That was the transcendence. As you think about Neo in the Matrix, right? Like he was living in an ordinary world. I think he was drinking Mountain Dew in his fucking basement somewhere. And then Morpheus comes and says, "You're the chosen one." And Neo resisted. "I'm not the chosen one." Well, Neo was stripped out of his everyday existence, transcended, and he went into the battleground, the training ground where he failed over and over again, where he questioned whether or not he was the one. And he went through a form of hell, as did Morpheus and the rest of those who were looking to see if like he was the guy. But then he found his power. He found his center, as what Robert Moore would talk about, that power source that allowed him to step into the great version of himself. And this last phase, which is phase 3, the reconstitution, Moore says, once you have been incubated in the womb for an optimal time and you have been cooled just right in the alchemical vessel, then it is time for you to leave phase 2 and cross the second threshold into phase 3, which is back into the ordinary world. In Zen Buddhism, they say that before enlightenment, the mountain is just a mountain. That during enlightenment, the mountain is no longer a mountain. But then after enlightenment, the mountain is once again a mountain. In other words, a return to the ordinary. Spiritual masters of almost every tradition say that enlightenment must bring a return to the ordinary, and the enlightened person must return to the ordinary. You must be able to be ordinary if you want to be enlightened. And what I believe Moore is saying here is we are going to be coming back to a new form of ordinary after this is all said and done. The world will rebuild. We will be out of this quarantine. We will be past the coronavirus. And we will not be the same people that we were when we came in, right? And those people, those men who are not standing on a foundation of inner work, are probably just going to blow past this without recognizing the powerful time that we are in to transform, to change, to go deeper. But those of you who are listening, who are standing on that foundation of inner work, recognize that this is your time to be stronger, your time to suffer, to actually be broken down and allow yourself to be broken down, to feel those periods of anxiety, to feel those periods of demotivation, because if you are looking at this from the place of initiation, that limbo, that nowhereness, that stripping of energy is actually a part of the old you dying, so that a bigger form of you, the greater form of you, can reconstitute itself and come out on the other side. That's how I'm choosing to look at it. And I challenge you and call you forward to look at it that way too. Because what Moore says is, there is no such thing as being finished with your initiations. Once you get through the initiation that you're in now, you get your reconstitution, and then you're going to reach another plateau in your life. And then the next initiative process comes along. We are constantly on a cycle of initiations, growth, and development if we recognize where we are in the process. One of the key terms that Moore talks about in order for an initiation to impact you is this concept of submission. An honoring, a submission, a bended knee crossing the threshold, recognizing that you are now in non-ordinary space. The men who are standing without a foundation of inner work have not fully surrendered, have not fully submitted to the fact that we are in sacred space. It takes a certain level of humility to bend that knee, to recognize that this is a time and a period in an existence that you cannot control. Therefore, you must submit to the process and go inward and find that power source so that you can choose how to come out on the other side. So I encourage you to look at where you haven't fully yet surrendered or submitted to the sacred space that we are in, so you can fully transcend from ordinary world to non-ordinary world, to go through the belly of the beast, to reconstitute yourself as a great man within, and then step out on the other side and be ready for this ordinary world to be the leader that this world needs you to be, and the man that your family wants you to be, that your business wants you to be, that you want to be. Hey, if you like this episode, don't forget to hit subscribe, share it with a man who you want to call forward in your life. And don't forget, we have a whole bounty of resources available for you for free download at doinnerwork.com/resources. We have book lists, guided meditations, and a bunch of other ideas on how you can optimize your performance in your work and in your life. That's at doinnerwork.com/resources.